So thank you for inviting me to participate in this. I'm very excited and very passionate about parks being involved in watershed management and improvement. My name is Michelle Kosieniak, as is on the slide. My title is the Superintendent of Planning and Design for Lexington Parks and Recreation. I've been working at parks somewhere around 22 years, always in the planning and design office. That's sort of my zone. I want you to know a little bit about Lexington Parks and Recreation. I'm not sure who all's on this call. I see lots of familiar names. But in case you don't know, Lexington has a fairly robust parks department. We have a budget, an operating budget of between 20 and $25 million. Much of that is salaries because we are a large department with 150 to 200 full-time employees. And in the warmer months of the year, we add about 1,200 to 1,500 part-time and seasonal workers. So in comparison, there are parks departments that will have 1 to 3 employees. And so what I tried to do was to write this presentation, not just from the perspective of Lexington, but from all general parks departments based on my 20 plus years of experience in the industry. So to begin, what is a park agency's role in local watershed management? A lot of that can vary, and the reason for the variance is parks departments can have authority in a number of ways. It could be that they are part of the municipality, which could be a city or a county. They can be an independent parks district, and by that I mean they have a dedicated tax on the community and they operate completely independently of the local government. Parks departments can also be fully nonprofit, and normally that's in the form of a foundation. And so when you're considering a parks department as your partner, you really need to find out which of those models the parks department in the watershed you're looking at is. And then also within each of those types, you will find that some parks departments have a recreation only mission, which means sports, exercise, arts and crafts. It's all about leisure activities, a lot of programmed group activities, and not a lot of natural resource management. You will also find parks departments that are truly just worried about parks. In other words, all they do is natural resource management. A lot of those departments will have rangers. They will focus on outdoor activities and nature education, but they don't have soccer and Zumba and all the things you'd think of with a recreation piece. Then you have blends, which is what Lexington Parks and Recreation is here locally, and a lot of the agencies here in here in Kentucky, I have found are a blend. They have both in their mission and in their focus. Water quality improvements are obviously beneficial to parks, meaning parkland, the park itself. The obvious one being improved water quality. But what we have seen in our experience is it increases plant and animal diversity. We have reduced mowing, and by that I mean less short turf mowing, which translates directly to less cash spent for our department. And what we were able to do is for the first year this year, we were able to take some of that savings and ask that it be designated for watershed or environmental improvement. And I'll talk more about that later. So that was pretty exciting. And the biggest benefit, though, that I will say that I have seen in my experience with watershed projects and partnering on them is the volunteer partnerships that come out of it. And there are many reasons for that. Number one, volunteers or watershed coordinators bring expertise that is missing on a lot of park staff. They replace or reduce the amount of work that park staff has to do to obtain an improvement. They bring dollars that are otherwise inaccessible. to parks. So it may be that there's a grant that's open to nonprofits or to watershed coordinating agencies, but not to Parks and Recreation. And so by being a partner, we have access to funds that otherwise we wouldn't be able to apply for. And the last thing is it widens the circle of park stewards. And that is our number one goal, is that everyone in our community would be as passionate about their parks and open spaces, their public parks and open spaces, as we at Parks and Recreation are. Some of the challenges that I have observed as a parks professional in executing watershed improvements. One is sheer quantity. So without outside agency help, without volunteers, just the sheer, we have 100 and some parks in Lexington. We have 56 that have FEMA designated floodplain, which equals over 70 acres. And as I'll speak to lack of resources further down this slide, we have no one on staff that focuses on that. And so my office touches on it in little ways as we fulfill our primary mission, but without watershed coordination with other agencies and volunteers, we'd never be able to address that quantity of floodplain. Thinking outside Lexington, thinking outside Kentucky, or some in Kentucky, but some parks departments have the responsibility of extremely large watersheds, thinking lakes, very large lakes, Great Lakes, for example, rivers, very large watersheds, oceans. A lot of parks departments on the coasts have beaches as part of their responsibility. And so sometimes in other communities, you will face, that's a challenge, just to deal with a watershed that is massive and also would have, as you would expect, many layers of state and federal oversight. So that can be a challenge as well. Degradation is always both existing and new a challenge. So this the picture I've included in the slide, I just stole it off the internet. I have no idea where it is, but it's not something I would want in my park. But it represents traditionally an engineering solution to a problem. And we have a lot of those examples in our parks that exist from previous work. Then we have new degradation, which can come in the form of sedimentation, changes in runoff. It's always attractive to the developer to put the water in the lowest area next door, which is the park. So we get asked a lot to accept, potential runoff in our parks, and so that's a challenge. One thing that I think it's important for folks that are focused on watershed improvement need to understand is that from a parks professional standpoint, we're charged with balancing the use of land. And for some, a park means the place you play soccer or baseball or football. And so while an environmental professional may look at that opportunity as a wonderful floodplain for redevelopment for water quality, it's also maybe a sporting venue. And so it's up to the park professional to balance those needs. And so that's a challenge in many rights. Lack of resources, I kind of mentioned before, parks departments don't often have staff that are dedicated to environmental improvement projects, or they may just lack the expertise. They may not have dedicated funding. And then the next item that leads to my next slide is one of the challenges we always face is public perception. So I think everybody, if you study the photo I've included on my slide, can guess what park that is. I'll give you a few moments. It's essentially the quintessential romantic, great lawn that was built at the turn of the century and set the stage for what people nationwide expect their park to look like. So of course, this is Central Park in New York City, and that single perception is one of the greatest reasons that you will find community resistance to watershed projects, because many times water quality improvements done with sustainable green infrastructure don't match the same aesthetic as this great lawn. And so therein is a challenge that you need to be aware is out there. There are also you will also find resistance from the community from, and I call them perceived fears. I think that sometimes the fears are real, but in many instances they're exaggerated. The fear is disproportionate to the reality. But we have insects, ticks in tall grass. We have mosquitoes, any water in a park. There's an education component that most of you probably know that you have to explain that moving water and water with beneficial predators will not yield mosquitoes, but that's an education piece. Invariably, we get calls about if you have grass taller than 2 inches, you will have snakes. And despite Kentucky having very few poisonous snakes, that is a fear that we run into all the time. And then we have I put it in quotes, the wild animals, essentially because there are animals that love the habitats that water quality projects create. And they are perceived by the public, in my experience, as animals that should not be in suburbia or in an urban environment. Nobody wants to get, and it's because of the negative experiences people have had. No one wants to get sprayed by a skunk. No one wants a raccoon in their garbage. No one wants their pet getting bitten by a rabid fox. And I tried to think of something that possums did that was truly harmful, but mostly I think it's just because they're kind of repulsive to some people. I think they're cute, but and then human dangers. There is a perception that because someone does not have a home and spends time in a park or a public place, that they are somehow dangerous. No studies that I have seen back this up, but the general public is fearful when they see someone who appears not to have a home in a public space. And there is no study, again, to back this up, that open green spaces that are naturalized will bring about criminal activity. But that is a perception that a lot of people have. I have never seen someone rob a house and carry a big screen TV into a greenway, but people have said that's what's going to happen. So just know that those perceived fears are out there, and that's a lot of times why you get the community resistance. Park professionals, specifically, all the above. So they live in the community most of the time too, and they can have all of the perceptions that we've talked about and be resistant for the same reasons. But there's also some things specifically that I think that others approaching watershed improvements need to be aware of. And that is, for any employee, a change in paradigm is scary. So if you have worked at a park for 30 years and you have groom mowed the park for 30 years, just simply suggesting a very different change of environment and appearance is just scary. It's just change. The other thing is that those folks are the front line for complaints. So we have meetings on site when we plan these projects, and we have presentations where we brag about them, but the people that collect the trash, the people that program in the park, the people that mow or don't mow, they are the ones that the public is going to approach and ask, why does this look so terrible, if they don't understand? And so some compassion for that is always appreciated for those individuals on the front lines. A lot of times park staff is not aware of the Clean Water Act and why any of us would want to be doing any of the activities that we're talking about today. So just a little education, or just knowing that not everybody lives and breathes the Clean Water Act is always helpful. And then the last reason that you might get resistance from park professionals is that they feel unprepared or untrained, and or they have no confidence that they will get training or resources that will be needed when a project is implemented. Some of the successful, I call them BMPs, but watershed improvement projects, water quality projects that in parks that I've personally been a part of in Lexington. We've had large and small tree plantings, large and small stream bank restoration projects. We've had native plant displays and managed prairies. those are great because those are prime public education opportunities, either passively or actively. So we really support and welcome those types of projects. I just sort of did a category for the next one that I called forebase, sealing basins, solid waste interceptors, and I probably forgot 6 or 7 other things that we could lump in there. Various versions of that type of thing where we're controlling or improving the purity of the water by various methods. And then I'm excited to mention that we're partnering. We've written a letter of support for a neighborhood association who is interested in specifically restoring soil structure as a water quality improvement project. And so we're really hopeful that gets funded, because that's in one of our parks in Lexington, and it will be exciting to see if it's successful. Oops. Okay, so this is my longest slide with no picture, so everybody bear with me. This is kind of the meat and the if I could tell you one thing slide. So I didn't even have room for a picture. I've been asked when and how to approach a parks department. And the first main bullet that I want to get across is before you make any choice limiting decisions. And by that I mean before you accept a grant, before you pay for design, before you contract work, before you release information to the public. And the reasons are that sometimes projects may have to be canceled. There might be grant requirements that are discovered that for whatever reason, let's say a deed restriction on the property in question makes it impossible. There may be land restrictions, again, deed restrictions, or historical designations that would prohibit any type of disturbance. There could be possible permit issues. There could be other construction plans or utility easements. There could be unsatisfactory experiences with a contractor you hope to use. So for all those reasons, you surely do not want to wait until you don't want to make any of those decisions, those choice limiting decisions, before talking to the Parks Department if they are the steward of of the land that you're interested in improving. So the more you know, the better your success is going to be. So this is the do your homework, and what kind of homework I would recommend people do. In any community, the first place to start is looking at the region, city, county, and look for green infrastructure and green infrastructure and environmental improvements that have already occurred. Look for low impact development manuals, stormwater engineering manuals, anything greenway master plans, anything they've produced in that region, city, county, whatever the jurisdiction is, that can help guide you to the mission. Then, if you're focused on a particular site, do your site-specific research. Look for a general overall Parks Department master plan to look for mission goals that can be helpful. You know, if you approach a Parks Department and you say, look here, your number 3 goal is increase green space or increase natural green space, you can point out to them that a water quality improvement would meet that goal. Look for a master plan for that park specifically if one exists. Look for watershed plans, and I'll talk about an example of that later. The next thing, talk to stakeholders. So if you are aware of the site, then you've obviously visited it. Well, one would think. Look around and see who's using that space and speak to them if you feel comfortable. If there are sporting venues on the site, if there are other passive recreation like a trail, try to engage users and find out what they would think. Would they be in support? Would they be against it? This will prepare you for things you may learn when speaking to the Parks Department, and you can say, I've already talked to them, and here's who I talked to, and here's what I found out. You may find that some of those stakeholders could be potential volunteers for a project implementation. So I strongly suggest doing that. Obviously, you want to have some kind of concept, and even if you don't have a drawn concept, bringing pictures or images of similar successes, which is the next bullet on my slide. So cite those. say, hey, 2 counties over, we did this and it was a great success, and I think we can do this here on a bigger or smaller scale, or whatever the case may be. Um, I was unsure about the next two bullets, which one to go first, because I was imagining being presented with a water quality improvement project proposal. And I'm not sure if my first question would be, how do we pay for it, or how do we take care of it? But we'll address them in the order on the slide. So how do we take care of it? Please, when you do your proposals, think about a maintenance plan. Don't assume that the Parks Department is going to have the people or the tools or the resources or the knowledge to take care of these projects. So there needs to be a maintenance plan, at least some thought put into that. And then find and suggest funding sources. Don't assume the Parks Department has any money. I can tell you almost all Parks Departments pre-COVID were funded, and during COVID our budgets have been slashed. At the same time that the country is having kind of a second awakening of how important our parks and public space, green spaces are. So I suspect that this has bolstered support for parks, and that will be evident in coming years. But parks in general pre-COVID were funded very poorly for the value that they bring their communities. And that's not just a public parks employee speaking. That's generally, if you search, there's a lot of work being done nationally by foundations and organizations to bring that to light. So be ready, with ideas, grants, sources of willing volunteer labor, possible donors or other partners who have money. So be ready for to bring those ideas to the table. And then the one thing I would say don't miss out on is the opportunity for parks departments, at least those with some size, to bring non-cash resources. So they might have staff that is able to help with permitting. They may have, even just writing letters of support for grants. Those are easy things that most, or the letters of support are easy. And then some parks departments may be able to contribute materials, soil, gravel, logs. You just don't know. And then some have equipment and have heavy equipment and heavy equipment operators that they can't contribute cash, but they could assign, their staff to work for give 20 hours to the project or whatever. So never overlook those non-cash resources. Some of the lessons I've learned, and there's quite a few people I think I saw on this session that will chuckle. Signage is not foolproof. So if you think that you're going to do a project like the one pictured below and just put up signs and say, do not mow, it's probably not going to work. So what we've learned is you need to have in your plan education and opportunities beyond that to protect the investment. And so the first one, contractor and staff education, I almost think that this is a necessity, no different than when Parks builds a building and we have a new HVAC system. We pay the installer of the HVAC system to give our staff a training. How do you run this? How do you service it? What are my annual obligations? Is there a seasonal obligation? And go through it with the staff that will be left as part steward for this improvement. By the same token, in order to make your project successful long-term and sustainable, we often encourage and support in any way we can projects that include a volunteer sort of an education day, a field day for the general public. And a lot of times they will try to gather partners that have similar missions to participate in a field day. They might try to find some giveaways, have some kids activities. Obviously, none of this happens during COVID, but under normal circumstances, we've seen in our parks a number of these, and they might be put on your boots and take a walk through the stream watershed and see the improvements, and go on a wildflower walk, and all kinds of things. And many of these are led by the volunteers that were involved in the projects, and for that we are very grateful, because we believe, again, it widens the circle of stewards that are going to take care of these parks in future generations. So some success stories I wanted to share for anyone not from the immediate Lexington area, but just sort of a broad brush too of different ways that Parks and Recreation has been touched by watershed coordination and improvement projects. Reforest the Bluegrass is a private public partnership that has been going strong for 20 years. There have been 195 acres of floodplains restored. The cost over those 20 years, there's about 200,000 in both government funds and private donations that have paid for the trees that the volunteers install. If that had been contracted out, that would be about $1.2 million. So $200,000 in volunteers versus $1.2 million contracted. Pretty striking difference in success there. And obviously, the more trees we have, the better our water quality is. Wolf Run Watershed Council, the queen of that council is actually on this session. And I told her if I misspoke, she needed to jump in and say something. So we might have to unmute Demetria. But councils like this, where the city identified Wolf Run as our most impaired watershed and formed a council where the citizens could participate and actually actively recommend how to carry out the projects identified in the watershed plan, are a success story. And the partner agent or the partner group for the Watershed Council is Friends of Wolf Run, and many people are familiar with them. And they are serving as mentor for the next two watersheds that are being looked at in succession in Lexington. So very successful model, and important to note that if you have one success, usually by begging, you can get the folks involved in that to help with the next similar success, maybe in a different watershed. So spread the knowledge. The Citizens Environmental Academy, I'll flip back. That slide you're looking at is Wellington Park. It was just finished about 2 weeks ago, and that is a Citizens Environmental Academy project. That's a program Lexington has patterned after the Citizens Police Academy. It's a 6-week course, and it gives citizens a chance to learn how the government works in areas of waste management, urban forestry, stormwater, energy, transportation, and wastewater. And a lot of times each participant is given an allowance of $2,000 to do a grant project at the end of the session if they attend all the sessions. And many times we have seen that they will combine their grants and implement a project such as you saw at Wellington. So Parks is very excited to be a partner of that specific program, and most Parks departments I would think would be very supportive in other cities and counties as well. And then the last one I wanted to share was, I almost feel like we need a sad face. Bring Back the Bluegrass was our #1 Parks and Recreation initiative for 2020. And we had planned a robust marketing rollout with lots of citizen engagement, and the coronavirus just kind of shut that down. So we were going to do some pilot projects again with social media, with public events to highlight it. And what we decided to do instead was let the whole shebang roll. And so in our parks all over our county, we have reduced the amount of groom mowing and turf mowing that we're doing. We spent about 2 years looking at maps, looking at master plans to figure out where that was most logical, including floodplains and steep slopes and those type of areas. But what this is a response to is in 2018, when we did our Parks and Recreation Master Plan, 83% of Lexington households supported the idea of using land to preserve open space and natural areas. So 83%, that's pretty strong. And so in listening to that, we narrowed that down to the two top priorities were walking and hiking trails and nature parks. And we can't build a formal nature park everywhere for every citizen. We have a couple in town. So our thought was we'll bring a little bit of nature park to each neighborhood park. And so we're rolling that out. We have had, for the most part, very positive feedback on this program. And we have had to pull back, in some instances to balance, again, what I spoke about earlier, the need for the neighborhood to have groom mode, turf mode, open space versus naturalized area. But in general, very successful. And we hope to, in this phase one, we hope for the public to become accustomed to this new park aesthetic. And then in phase two, we hope to partner with nonprofits and other government agencies to enhance these areas, whether it be planting trees or whether it be planting native plants, actually killing back the fescue and planting some native species. But this is sort of our first step, and so far so good. Check back with us maybe in 10 years and see how it's going. So that concludes my presentation, and I believe Steve is going to facilitate some questions.